My daughter-in-law appeared on my front porch in the middle of the night, barely able to stand with a bruised face and her hand clutching her pregnant belly. She looked up at me, struggling to whisper. It was Derek, your eldest son. He pushed me down and said this baby doesn't belong in our family. I looked at her injuries, picked up the phone to call my former prosecutor brother at 2 in the morning, and said, "It's time. Do exactly what our father taught us. I am so grateful you are here with me today. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell me where in the world are you watching from, your country, your city, I want to know. Every name in that comment section reminds me why these stories are worth telling. A small note. This story contains fictional elements added for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to names or places is coincidental, but the message inside it is worth keeping. Some nights in Harlow Falls, the whole town goes so quiet, you can hear the oak trees shifting in their roots. That was one of those nights, the kind that presses down on everything, like a heavy quilt muffling the world to almost nothing. The kind of night you remember not for what it sounded like, but for what it changed. I was sitting in my kitchen at 11 o'clock, holding a cup of coffee. I had no business drinking at that hour, when everything in my life began moving in a direction I had not prepared for. My name is Eugene Harold Whitfield. Most people in Harlow Falls call me Papa Gene. I am 67 years old, a retired carpenter, and I have lived in the same wooden house on Callaway Street for 31 years. The house has never felt smaller than it does on the nights I cannot sleep, which, since Beverly passed 9 years ago, has been most of them. The kitchen is where I spend those hours. Beverly made it that way, not by design, but by habit. She cooked every evening, kept the overhead light off, and used only the small lamp above the counter with its amber bulb that threw the whole room into a warm gold you could feel on your skin. I have kept that same bulb in that same fixture for 9 years, because replacing it would mean making the room look different from how she left it. I am not ready for that. Tonight the coffee is dark and too strong. Outside, the street is empty. The oak in the front yard, the one Beverly always said was older than the house itself, stands black and motionless against a charcoal sky. No wind, no cars. Nothing moving except the thin curl of steam rising from my mug. I reach into the second drawer beside the stove and take out the notebook. It is a brown leather book, soft at the edges, from decades of handling the spine swollen, where years of flour-dusted fingers worked into the binding. Beverly's handwriting fills every page, careful. Deliberate cursive she learned from her mother and never changed. The dates on the early pages go back over 40 years. Notes fill the margins, add a pinch more salt than it says. On one page near the back, simply Jean's favorite, underlined twice. I do not open it to cook. I have tried, and what comes out is edible, but it is not Beverly's food. She always said the real recipe was in the hands, in the pressure, in the timing built over years of repetition. That part she could not write down. That part is gone. I open it tonight because sometimes I need to see her handwriting. Nothing more than that. The page I land on is her honey peach cake. Caleb's birthday cake every August, made from Harmon Orchard peaches, every single year until Beverly got sick and could not stand at the stove long enough to finish it. That memory pulls me to a Sunday dinner nearly 3 years ago, when Simone came through my front door carrying a white cardboard box tied with kitchen twine. She opened it on the counter, and I saw Beverly's honey peach cake. Not something similar. Beverly's cake, the right color, the right glaze. The peaches laid in overlapping slices, exactly the way Beverly always arranged them. I stood in my own kitchen and could not speak for nearly 2 minutes. Caleb had found the notebook the week before, photographed every page and given the photos to Simone without explaining what the recipe meant. She had simply chosen it because it looked like something made with care. That was the moment I understood who she was. My sons, you cannot understand what I am about to tell you without knowing something about them first. Derek is 44, my firstborn. He directs a regional development firm here in Harlow Falls, sits on the board of the local community youth foundation, and 2 years ago, the Chamber of Commerce named him Community Leader of the Year. He carries himself with the particular certainty of a man who believes the world arranged itself around his arrival. I clapped at that ceremony. I was proud, and I meant it. Caleb is 36, 8 years younger, a gap that holds its own quiet history in our family. He is a plant operations engineer, careful and steady by both nature and training. Tonight, he is on emergency call at a construction site deep in the county's rural outskirts, far enough out that his signal comes and goes like a weak radio station. He texted me at 9 to say he would be unreachable most of the night. I am thinking about Derek, which is unusual. His life from the outside appears to require the least worrying about. But something sits quietly in my chest when I think about him tonight. A weight without a name. I push it aside and close the notebook. That is when I hear it, a sound from the front porch. Small. Not a knock, not a voice. Something soft landing against the wooden boards, like a hand reaching out to steady itself. It does not repeat. I set the mug down and walk to the front door. The porch light is on the way. I keep it every night out of a habit Beverly started. She is on her knees on the porch, right hand pressed to her side, left hand flat against the boards to keep from going all the way down. Her breathing is shallow and deliberate, the kind a person uses when breathing itself requires concentration. The porch light falls across her face, and what I see stops me at the threshold. Her right eye is swollen nearly shut. Her lower lip is split. The left side of her jaw is darkening already, purple-blue spreading beneath the skin. She is wearing the light blue blouse I recognize from school mornings, and there is a rust-brown smear along the sleeve I do not let myself name yet. She lifts her face toward the light. The one eye she can fully open finds mine. "Papa Jean," she whispers. I cross the porch and get my arm around her. She is shaking, not visibly, but in that deep, involuntary way that tells you a body has been holding itself together through sheer will and has finally found something solid enough to release against. 35 years of carpentry taught me that when something cracks, you do not demand answers before understanding what you are looking at. You study the break first, the grain, the depth, the direction, then you ask your questions. I look at Simone's face in Beverly's amber light, and I understand the shape of what has happened. Not all of it. Not yet, but enough to know that this quiet Wednesday night has just become something else entirely, and that whatever she tells me next is going to divide my life into a before and an after. I just do not know yet how wide that division will run. I guided her to the kitchen table and pulled out the chair Beverly always sat in, the one closest to the window, and eased Simone down into it without thinking. She winced as she settled, a sharp intake of breath that told me more than any doctor's report would later confirm. I went to the counter and reached for my phone. Her hands found my wrist before I could dial, both of them wrapping around my forearm the way a person grabs something when they are afraid it will move before they are ready. "Wait," she said. "Please, let me tell you first." I looked at her hands on my wrist. Her right index finger was swollen along the knuckle, sitting at an angle that was not quite right. I set the phone face down on the counter and came back to the table. "Why didn't you call 911 from the house?" I asked. She did not hesitate. She had clearly thought this through on the drive over or in the minutes she spent on the floor before she could make herself move. "If police showed up tonight, the person who did this would know immediately," she said. "He would have time to call a lawyer before anyone questioned him, time to get his story straight." She steadied her breath. I needed to talk to someone I trust first. Someone who could help me think before any of that starts. I sat with that. There are two kinds of people who come to your door in a crisis. Those who have lost their footing and need someone to hold them up, and those who have already assessed the situation and come to you by deliberate choice. Simone was the second kind. She had driven 25 minutes through the dark, with cracked ribs and a dislocated finger, stopping twice along Route 9 when the pain became too much to push through. She had done it with a clear reason for every decision she had made since pulling herself off the floor. She is 33 years old. She teaches third grade at Harlow Falls Elementary, the kind of teacher parents request by name, whose students tape drawings to her classroom door every fall. When she walks into a room, the room reorganizes itself around her without anyone deciding that should happen. Caleb brought her to my house 11 days after their first date. I remember thinking that was either very confident or very certain. Watching Simone that evening, I understood it was the second one. They have been married 4 years. For 3 of those years, they were trying to have a child. I knew this, the way you know things in a family. When no one tells you directly, through silences, through the particular way, Caleb would go quiet after holiday dinners, sitting on the porch in the dark. Through the mornings, Simone showed up to church with a composure that sat just slightly too carefully on her face. I never asked. It was not my place. I kept the door open and let them carry it the way they needed to. 3 weeks ago, on a Thursday morning, my phone rang at 7:45. It was Simone, her voice shaking in a way I had never heard before. Not fear, not grief, but something too large and too new to hold steady. "Papa Jean," she said. "I'm pregnant. 9 weeks. I had to sit down. I was standing at the counter with my coffee, and I had to pull out the nearest chair because my legs made clear they were not going to hold me through whatever came next. I told her I was glad. I told her Beverly would have been glad. After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen for a long time in a silence that for the first time in years did not feel like absence. That was 3 weeks ago. Tonight, Caleb had left for the worksite before noon, a project 40 miles outside Harlow Falls, deep in the Hill County, where cell towers are sparse and signal drops without warning. He had texted Simone at 6 to say he had arrived, and reception was unreliable. She had texted back that she loved him and would see him tomorrow. She turned her phone off after parking in my driveway. She told me this plainly, without apology. She did not want Caleb to call and hear her voice before she had spoken with me, before she had figured out what came next. I was alone, she said. Caleb had been gone since morning. I was reading in the living room. She stopped and looked down at her hands resting on the table, both of them side by side. The swollen finger on the right, tilted just enough to catch the light differently from the others. I looked at it too. 35 years of carpentry. I know what a dislocated finger looks like. I know the way a joint sits when it has been forced past its range, when the bone has been pulled from where it belongs, and the tissue is already swelling in protest. Around 9 o'clock, she said, there was a knock at the door. She stopped not from pain this time, but from the weight of what she was about to say. The way you pause before setting something heavy down, knowing that once it lands on the table it cannot be picked back up. She looked at her hands. Then she looked at me. And she said his name. I heard it. I know I heard it correctly. But I sat in my chair without moving, and the clock above the refrigerator counted out 3 full strokes before I let out the breath I had been holding. I wanted to have heard wrong. I needed for just a moment to believe I had misunderstood her. But Simone did not look away. She held my eyes across the table and said the name again, slower this time, clearer. The way you repeat something to a person when you understand they need to hear it twice before it becomes real. Derek, my firstborn. The name sat between us on that kitchen table like something neither of us wanted to touch, but it was there, and we were both going to have to face it. I did not reach for my phone. I did not stand up. I sat in my chair at the table where I had eaten breakfast every morning for 31 years, and I let the name settle into the room the way a stone settles into still water, quietly, with weight changing everything around it, without making a sound. Simone watched me. She had said it twice. She was waiting to see what I would do with it. What I did was nothing for a long moment. And then I said, "Tell me everything. From the beginning." She had opened the door because Derek came with a white flag, or what looked like one. A bottle of Garrison Brothers Bourbon Good Label, the kind you bring when you want someone to believe the gesture is sincere. He was smiling when she answered the knock. Not the tight, performative smile she had seen at family gatherings for 4 years. Something that looked, she said, like effort. Like a man trying. He told her he wanted to start over, that he had not been fair to her, that Caleb deserved better from him, and so did she. Simone, because she is at her core, a person who believes in the possibility of better, stepped aside and let him in. I heard that, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not surprise, something closer to recognition. Because I knew, sitting at that table, that I had spent 4 years making the same calculation she had made at that door. Giving Derek the benefit of what I had told myself was patience. I thought about the first dinner the evening Caleb brought Simone home, maybe 3 weeks after they had started seeing each other. Derek had been polite in the way that costs nothing and gives nothing. Handshake, 2 sentences, eyes that moved past her to the rest of the room. I had told myself he was reserved, that he needed time. I thought about the engagement party. Derek arrived 40 minutes late and left before dessert. Said he had an early meeting. I did not push it. I thought about the wedding. He gave a toast that lasted 90 seconds. The band started playing before the silence after it had fully settled, which was, I understood now, an act of mercy on the bandleader's part. I had told Caleb afterward that Derek was not a man who expressed himself easily. That was the word I used. Easily. And then there were the smaller things, the kind that looked at one by one could be dismissed. The comment at Thanksgiving about the way Simone had arranged the serving dishes. The remark at Easter about where she had gone to school. The way he would direct questions about Caleb's career to Caleb himself, even when Simone was mid-sentence, as if her words had a volume only he could not quite hear. Each one, standing alone, looked like nothing. Looked like personality. Looked like a man who was difficult in the ordinary way that some people are difficult. Sitting at this table at nearly midnight, I understood what I had been looking at. Not a man who needed time. A man who had already decided, and who had spent 4 years being consistent about it, in ways small enough to escape consequence. Simone continued. They sat in the living room. Derek poured 2 glasses and pushed one toward her across the coffee table. She declined, told him simply that she was not drinking tonight. He looked at her. Not a long look, just a beat, a fraction of a second, where his attention sharpened and then smoothed itself back out. He said, "That's fine," and stood up to get more ice from the kitchen. She did not think anything of it at the time. She was looking at her hands in her lap, she said, running through whether she believed any of what he had told her at the door. What she did not know, and only understood later, was that when Derek walked into her kitchen, he saw the prenatal vitamins on the shelf beside the window. A box, the kind with the soft pink lettering, the kind that does not look like anything else on a kitchen shelf. She had set it there that morning after her appointment, and had not thought to put it away. She had not been expecting anyone. 2 things. He had 2 things, a woman who declined a drink without explanation and a box of prenatal vitamins on the kitchen shelf. For a man like Derek, precise, observant, the kind of person who processes information the way an accountant processes numbers, 2 things were enough. He came back from the kitchen and sat down. and he began to speak in a voice that was, Simone said, calmer than any raised voice she had ever heard. Calmer, and because of that, worse. He told her that Caleb had married her out of pity. That was the word he used. Pity. He said it without heat, the way you state a fact you have held for a long time and no longer feel the need to soften. He said she had never truly belonged in this family, that there were things about her he did not specify, and the not specifying was its own kind of precision that Caleb would eventually come to understand. I listened, and I thought about every moment I had filed away as nothing. Every brick I had watched Derek place without understanding he was building something. Simone said she stood up. She told him to leave. Derek did not leave. He stood up too, and he moved toward her in the way she described as deliberate, not rushed, not out of control, but with the particular steadiness of a man who had decided what he was going to do before he ever knocked on the door. She backed into the hallway. He followed. She stopped mid-sentence. Her hand moved to her stomach. Not a gesture she chose. A reflex. The oldest reflex there is. She pressed her palm flat against herself, and she stopped talking, and she looked at the table. I looked at her hand. I understood immediately what that placement meant, and what it meant that she had paused there before the next part. I had raised 2 sons. I knew what it looked like when someone was gathering themselves to say the hardest thing they had to say. I waited. The clock above the refrigerator kept its count. Outside Harlow Falls was completely still, and in the amber light of Beverly's kitchen, Simone took one long breath and prepared to tell me the rest. She told me what happened next slowly, in the way you tell someone something, when your body has not entirely finished processing it, as if the words had to travel a longer distance than usual before they reached your mouth. I did not move. I did not reach for my coffee. I sat across from her in Beverly's kitchen, with my hands flat on the table, and I listened the way I had learned to listen in the workshop when something was wrong completely, without filling the silence with anything of my own. Derek had pushed her into the hallway wall, not a shove born of impulse. She was clear about that. He had moved toward her with the kind of steadiness that does not leave room for accident. And when she pushed back both hands against his chest, telling him to get out, he pushed again. Harder. The second push had the weight of a decision behind it. She was standing at the top of the staircase. She went down 4 steps before the wall stopped her. Her back hit the edge of a stair. Her hip caught the bottom. Her right hand grabbed for the banister as she fell, and her index finger caught between the rails at an angle the finger was not built to hold. She heard it before she felt it, a small, dense sound, the kind that lives in the bone. She lay on the floor at the bottom of the stairs, and she did not scream. She told me this without apology, as if she understood I might wonder. She said her whole body went to one place, not to the pain in her ribs, not to the finger, but to her abdomen. To the question that was the only question that mattered in that moment. She pressed her hand flat against herself, and she waited, listened inward the way a person does when they are trying to hear something they are terrified they might not hear. Derek stood at the top of the stairs and looked down at her. He did not come down. He did not ask if she was hurt. He did not reach for his phone. He stood at the top of those stairs, and he looked at her the way a man looks at something he has assessed and found to be less than he expected. And he said, in a voice that was low and unhurried and clear on every syllable, "Whatever is growing inside you doesn't belong in this family." She had not confirmed the pregnancy to anyone outside of my call 3 weeks ago. Not to Derek, not to anyone in the extended family. Derek did not know. He suspected 2 signs, added together by a precise and calculating mind, but he did not know with certainty. I thought about that when she told me. I have thought about it many times since. A man who knows something for certain and acts on it is one kind of dangerous. A man who only suspects and is willing to say what Derek said anyway, willing to aim that sentence at a woman lying at the bottom of his stairs, is something else. Something that does not have a clean name, but that I recognized when I heard it sitting at my kitchen table at midnight, as the thing I should have been paying closer attention to for years. Derek came down the stairs, stepped past her, and walked to the front door. He pulled it closed behind him with the quiet care of a man leaving a room where nothing has happened. Simone lay on the floor. She told me she stayed there for a long time. She did not know exactly how long, because time does not move normally when your body is deciding what it can and cannot do. The pain in her ribs came fully online, slowly, the way serious pain does not all at once but in waves, each one clarifying what the previous one had only suggested. Breathing became a negotiation. Every inhale cost something. Her car keys were on the kitchen counter. Her phone was beside them. She had set both down when she came home from school that afternoon, the way she always did. She did not need the stairs to reach them. She needed to get across the hallway floor and into the kitchen, which was its own undertaking. She did not call 911 from the floor. She had already told me why, and I did not need her to say it again. If police arrived at that house within the hour, Derek would know before morning. He would have his lawyer on the phone before anyone had taken a formal statement. He would have a version of the evening assembled and rehearsed before a single official question was asked. She was not going to give him that. She needed someone first, someone who could help her think before the machinery of the legal system started moving, because once it started, it would move on its own schedule, not hers. She needed me. It took her close to an hour to get across the floor and into the kitchen. She did not tell me the details of that hour, and I did not ask. Some things a person tells you, and some things they keep, and a man who has spent a lifetime working with his hands knows the difference between the two. She got her keys. She got her phone. She turned the phone off in the driveway. She would not explain that to Caleb over a crackling signal from 40 miles out in the hill country. Not tonight. Not like this. She drove slowly. She stopped twice on Route 9 when a bump in the road sent pain through her ribs sharp enough to make her vision blur. 25 minutes door to door. She had ended up on my porch. I put my hand over hers on the table. Both of mine over both of hers, the way my father used to do when something was beyond the reach of words, and you needed to say that without speaking. She looked up at me, and for the first time since she had started talking, since she had walked through every door of that evening and made herself stand in each room long enough to describe it, her eyes filled. Not from pain, something past pain. The particular release that comes when a person has been carrying something alone and has finally, after a long time, set it down somewhere safe. I stood up and picked up my phone from the counter. This time she did not reach for my wrist. I called 911. I gave the address. I said there was a woman with injuries who needed an ambulance. I gave them enough and not more, because some of what had happened in that house tonight was not for a dispatcher to know before a doctor had seen Simone. And before I had made one more call, the call I was already composing in my mind while the ambulance was still on its way. Not to Derek, not to Caleb, not yet. There was one person I had called in every genuine crisis of my adult life. One person who had never once given me the wrong answer. I stood at the kitchen window and looked out at the dark street, and I thought about Raymond. The ambulance arrived in 11 minutes. I know because I counted. There are things you do when you are trying not to think. Counting is one of them, and I learned it from Beverly, who used to count ceiling tiles in waiting rooms when she was trying to hold herself together. I rode with Simone. The paramedics did not argue about it. I sat on the narrow bench along the side wall and held her hand, and did not talk because there was nothing to say that would have helped. She looked at the ceiling the whole ride. Her lips moved once, very slightly. I did not ask what she said. I knew what I would have been saying in her position. Harlow Falls General is a small hospital for a small town, 2 floors a parking lot, that empties after 10 corridors that smell of antiseptic and old coffee. The emergency entrance is on the north side. The automatic doors slid open, and the paramedics wheeled Simone through, and a nurse met them at the threshold with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this 10,000 times. A woman in scrubs touched my arm at the door and told me I could wait inside to the left. 4 plastic chairs against a white wall under fluorescent lighting that had no interest in being kind to anyone sitting beneath it. I sat down. A clock on the wall read 1:18 in the morning. I looked at it once and then deliberately looked away. Beverly came to mind the way she always does on her own schedule without asking permission. She had worked as a nurse's aide for 11 years before her knees made the long shifts impossible. She moved through medical spaces with a comfort I never managed. Whenever something required a waiting room, Beverly was the one who sat without fidgeting, who spoke to doctors in their own language, who made the whole experience feel survivable. I had always called that a skill. Sitting alone in this hallway, I understood it was something more. It was the ability to be fully present in a hard moment without looking for the exit. I thought about Beverly and Derek. She had understood him in ways I had not. She told me once after a dinner where Derek had spent the evening looking past everyone at nothing, that he needed to feel like he mattered. Not loved mattered. There was a difference in her mind, and she was precise about it. When he felt that she said he could be warm in his quiet way. When he did not, he became cold in a manner that went beyond ordinary mood. He just needs time, I had told her. She looked at me over her coffee cup with the expression she kept for when she thought I was wrong, but had decided not to argue. I had read it as disagreement about Derek. Tonight I understood she had been looking at me. When Beverly died, I was too consumed by my own grief to see what her absence did to him. Derek came to the funeral, said the right things, shook the right hands, and was gone before the reception ended. I told myself he grieved privately. Some people do. Then Caleb brought Simone home. Warm, present, genuinely interested in the people around her. Caleb loved her the way Beverly and I had loved each other, not perfectly, but completely. I watched Derek watch that across 4 years of dinners and holidays. I named what I saw in his face indifference. I was sitting in a plastic chair at 1:30 in the morning when I finally named it correctly. It was not indifference. It was envy not of Simone but of Caleb, of what Caleb had found and held on to, while Derek had hollowed himself out to the point where that kind of connection was no longer something he could reach honestly. He could not take it, so he had spent 4 years doing the next available thing, eroding it. Small comments, cold silences, a toast at a wedding that lasted 90 seconds while the room held its breath. I had known something was wrong. Not this, not tonight. But I had felt the unease for years and chosen not to examine it too closely, because examining it would have meant doing something about it. Beverly would have done something about it. I had told myself she would have known what to say. The truth, the one I sat with alone in that corridor, was simpler and harder. She would have said something, and I would have had to listen. The doctor came through the door at 3:14. A compact woman with gray at her temples and the unhurried manner of someone who delivers difficult news, often enough to have learned how to hold it steadily. She sat in the chair beside me and spoke quietly. 2 cracked ribs. The index finger had been dislocated and was now reduced and splinted, bruising across the left side of the face, no internal bleeding. She paused, and in that pause I stopped breathing entirely. The baby was fine. Heartbeat strong and regular, confirmed on Doppler. 9 weeks along, no signs of distress. I closed my eyes. I held that information inside me for a long moment before I let myself do anything else with it. Whatever Derek had aimed at Simone on those stairs, whatever he had been willing to risk with one sentence spoken into the dark, it had not landed. Not tonight. When I opened my eyes, I took my phone from my pocket. Not Caleb. Not yet, Simone had asked, and I was honoring that until morning. Not Derek. That conversation, if it ever happened, would not be tonight and would not be from me alone. I scrolled to one name. Raymond. My older brother, 71 years old, 32 years as a county prosecutor before he retired. A man who had spent his entire career on a single conviction, that the truth, given the right tools and enough patience, always finds its way to the surface. I pressed call and listened to the line ring in the dark hallway. Raymond had never once failed to answer when I needed him. Not in all the years I had known him. I held the phone to my ear and I waited, and I already knew before the second ring finished that tonight would be no different. Raymond picked up on the second ring. Not the third, not the fourth, the second. That was Raymond. That had always been Raymond. 71 years old, 3 years into retirement, and he still answered the phone like a man who had been expecting your call all along. Jean. Not a question, just my name, said the way he has said it for 67 years, with the particular weight of someone who already understands that if I am calling at this hour, the reason is real. I need to tell you something, I said. Then tell me. I found a corner at the far end of the hallway near a window that looked out over the empty parking lot. A single light on a tall pole threw a pale circle on the asphalt below. I stood in that corner and I told Raymond everything not the way I wanted to tell it, which was with all the anger and confusion still tangled together, but the way he had taught me to tell things when we were young. Raymond had a rule, he called it, though it was really our father's rule passed down and refined. Facts first, Jean. Feelings after. He had said it to me the first time when I was 11 years old, and had come home from a fight at school so upset I could barely form a sentence. He sat me down and said, "Tell me what happened before you tell me how you feel about it." I have used that rule imperfectly for the rest of my life. Tonight I used it as well as I ever have. I told him the timeline. Derek arriving at Caleb and Simone's house with bourbon. Simone refusing the drink. The prenatal vitamins on the kitchen shelf. Derek's calculation. The hallway, the stairs, the 4 steps. The sentence Derek had spoken before he walked out and pulled the door quietly closed behind him. Simone's drive to my house. The hospital. The doctor's report 30 minutes ago, 2 cracked ribs, a dislocated finger, now splinted, bruising across the left side of her face. And the part I said last, the part that still sat in my chest, like something not yet fully real. The baby was fine. Raymond did not interrupt once. When I finished, there was a silence brief, the kind that means a person is not searching for words, but arranging the ones they already have. "Where is Derek now?" He asked. "At home, most likely." "Has Caleb been told?" "Not yet. Simone asked me to wait until morning. The signal out at his worksite is unreliable." "Good," Raymond said. "Don't call Derek. Don't let him know what Simone told you. Text Caleb at 6. I need to make some calls." I asked him what he was going to do. There was a pause, not hesitation, just the rhythm of a man who answers questions the way he always has, with a precision that does not waste motion. "What Papa taught us," he said. I knew exactly what that meant. Our father was a quiet man, not passive quiet. There is a difference, and he embodied it completely. When our father had something to say, he had usually spent a considerable amount of time deciding whether it was worth saying, and by the time it came out, every word was load-bearing. He worked as a county records clerk for 30 years, and he understood better than anyone I have known that the most powerful thing in any dispute is not the loudest voice in the room. It is the most complete record. When I was in my late 20s, a construction company in our county had been systematically underpaying the pension contributions of its workers for 11 years. The workers knew something was wrong. They complained. Nothing happened. Papa spent 3 years going through public filings, cross-referencing payroll records, documenting every discrepancy in a wooden box he kept under the workbench in his garage. I can still remember the smell of that box, cedar and paper, and the particular dry scent of documents that have been handled carefully over a long period of time. He walked into that company's office one afternoon with the box under his arm and walked out with a settlement of $180,000 distributed among 23 workers. He did not raise his voice once. He did not threaten anyone. He simply placed the box on the table and explained quietly what was in it. Raymond had learned that lesson better than I had. I had always been the brother who wanted to act, to move, to confront, to resolve things through the force of direct engagement. Raymond had learned to be patient in the way Papa was patient, to build before he moved. I had spent 67 years admiring that quality in both of them and struggling to replicate it. Tonight, for the first time, I could remember I did not want to act. I wanted to wait. The anger was there, sitting low in my chest, present and real, but underneath it was something cooler and more deliberate. And I recognized it as the first thing Raymond had ever taught me that I had fully absorbed. Before he hung up, Raymond said, "Jean, stay with Simone, don't leave that hospital, and don't make any decision tonight that you can't walk back tomorrow." "All right," I said. "I mean it." "I know you mean it." The line went quiet. I stood in the corner of the hallway with the phone in my hand, and I thought about something. In the entire length of that conversation, in every question Raymond had asked, and every instruction he had given, he had not once expressed surprise. Not at Derek's name, not at what had happened on those stairs, not at any of it. A man who spent 32 years in the prosecutor's office learns to modulate his reactions. I understood that. But there is a difference between professional composure and the particular stillness of someone who is not surprised, because they were already expecting the terrain. I walked back toward Simone's room. Halfway down the hall, I passed a wide mirror mounted beside a hand sanitizer station, and I stopped. I looked at the man in it. He looked older than the man who had been sitting in his kitchen a few hours ago, heavier in the face, slower around the eyes. Like time had moved differently tonight than it usually does. I thought about who Raymond might be calling at 3:30 in the morning. Then I remembered that he had spent 32 years knowing exactly which people answered their phones in the dark when something real was happening. He knew a great many people like that, and tonight, apparently, he was going to need them. I had been sitting in that plastic chair for 6 hours when I heard his footsteps coming down the hallway. I recognized Caleb's walk before I saw his face, always slightly faster than necessary, always like he had somewhere important to be. Even now. Even at 7:30 in the morning, after driving 2 hours on no sleep from a construction site 40 miles out in the hill country, he looked like the night had happened to him too, in its own way. Dust from the work site still along his jaw. His shirt was wrinkled in the particular way of a man who had grabbed it from wherever he left it and not thought twice. His eyes were red at the edges, not from crying, not yet, but from the road and from whatever those 2 hours of driving had done to him after he finally got a signal strong enough to receive my text. He walked straight past me into Simone's room without a word. I did not stop him. I did not call after him. He needed to see her first, needed to see with his own eyes that she was there and breathing and present, before any conversation with me could mean anything. I understood that without having to think about it. I sat with my cold coffee from the vending machine, and I waited. 20 minutes later, he came back out. He sat down in the chair beside mine and put his face in both hands, and his shoulders moved in the way. Shoulders move when a person is holding something in that is too large for the space available. I put my hand on his back, flat, between the shoulder blades, the same way I had put it there when he was 8 years old and had come off his bicycle on the gravel drive and could not decide whether he was more hurt or more embarrassed. When he lifted his head, his eyes were dry. Caleb has always been that way. The grief goes inward before it ever comes out. "Tell me everything," he said. So I told him. All of it. In the same order, I had told Raymond facts first, the way our father had taught. Caleb listened without interrupting. He was still in the way he is still when something requires his full attention, which is the stillness of a man who has trained himself to process before he reacts. He stayed still through most of it. When I reached the part about the stairs, about the 4 steps, and the finger and Simone lying on the floor, his jaw tightened. When I reached the sentence Derek had spoken before walking out, Caleb stood up. "I need to go to Derek's house," he said. His voice was even. That was the part that told me how serious he meant it. Not the words, but the evenness. "No," I said. He looked at me. "Dad, you're going to stay here," I said, "with your wife and your child. Raymond is handling this. Trust me." The look on Caleb's face in that moment was not simple. I have known my younger son for 36 years, and I have learned that when his face does something complicated, it is worth paying attention to. What I saw was not only anger, though the anger was there real and banked low like a fire that has been told to wait. Underneath it was something that hurt worse than anger. Something that did not have a clean name. Caleb had grown up watching Derek the way younger brothers sometimes watch older ones, with a specific quality of attention that does not ask to be reciprocated and does not require it. Derek was 12 years old when Caleb was born, already certain and capable, in the way that firstborns sometimes are already moving through the world with a confidence that a 4-year-old, then an 8-year-old, then a teenager watches and files away as a model. Caleb had never said this to me directly. He had not needed to. Beverly had said it to me once on a Sunday evening after Derek had come for dinner and left early as usual. She said Caleb loves Derek the way only a younger brother can completely, and without conditions. That's why if Derek ever truly lets him down, it won't just hurt him. It will break something that can't be put back the same way. I had remembered that sentence many times over the years. I had never understood it as fully as I understood it now. Watching my son sit back down in the plastic chair beside me and press his hands flat on his thighs and look at the floor. He was not deciding whether to trust me. He was deciding how to carry the weight of what it meant that Derek, his brother, the man whose confidence he had spent 36 years measuring himself against, had stood at the top of a staircase and looked down at Caleb's pregnant wife and done nothing. Finally, he nodded. Not with relief, not with agreement in any comfortable sense. With the particular resignation of a person who has run the calculation and concluded that the people he trusts have not yet led him wrong, and he is going to hold to that, even when every other instinct is telling him to move. "Raymond knows what he's doing?" he asked. Raymond always knows what he's doing. Caleb stood up and went back into Simone's room. I heard the door close behind him with the soft click of someone who has decided to put their energy somewhere it can actually help. I sat back in the plastic chair. I looked at the clock on the wall at the end of the hallway. 8:15. Raymond had been working for nearly 5 hours. I did not know what he had found, if anything. I did not know who he had called or what those calls had returned. I knew only what I had always known about my brother, that when he said he needed to make some calls, he was not describing a casual process. He was describing the beginning of something deliberate and patient and thorough, the kind of thing our father would have recognized and approved of. What I did not know yet was how far back what Raymond was building actually went. I would find out soon enough. But sitting in that hallway at 8:15 in the morning, with a cup of cold coffee and 6 hours of plastic chair behind me, I was not yet ready to learn that the thing Raymond had uncovered in the dark had nothing to do with Wednesday night, that it had been there for years, patient and quiet and waiting. Like most true things are for someone to finally look directly at it. Raymond called at 6:45 the next morning. I had not slept. I suspected he had not either, though you would never know it from his voice. Raymond always sounds like a man who has just had a full night's rest, regardless of what the clock says or what the night required of him. It is one of the more useful things he ever learned in 32 years of prosecution work, and I have never been able to replicate it. I was standing at the window at the end of the hallway when the phone rang. The parking lot outside was turning from gray to pale gold as the sun came up over the tree line. I answered before the second ring. "Tell me," I said. "Good morning to you too," Raymond said. Then, "Here is what I have." He spoke the way he always does when he is delivering something he has organized carefully, not rushing, not editorializing, moving through each point with the methodical patience of a man who understands that clarity is more valuable than speed. Thursday night after our call, he had contacted 3 people. The first was a retired detective he had worked alongside for 2 decades, a man named Garrett, who now consulted privately and kept hours that matched the kind of work Raymond was describing. The second was a family law attorney he had referred cases to for years, a woman whose judgment he trusted completely. The third was a former colleague now practicing civil litigation, someone who understood both the criminal and financial dimensions of what Raymond was beginning to see take shape. He had asked each of them the same question: if a person gained access to someone's home under false pretenses, physically assaulted them, causing documented injuries, and made a verbal threat directed at an unborn child, what were the legal options and what evidence would matter most? All 3 had given him what he needed. He had spent the rest of Thursday night building a framework from their answers. Then he had called Carolyn. Carolyn was a retired school teacher who lived 2 houses from Derek on the same street. Raymond knew her from First Grace Church. They had served on the same hospitality committee for 3 years. He called her at 7 Thursday morning, explained briefly what had happened to Simone, and asked whether she had seen anything unusual Wednesday evening. There was a long silence on her end, not the silence of someone searching their memory, the silence of someone deciding something. "Come by this morning," she said finally. "I'll show you what I have." Her security camera was mounted above the garage door and angled wide, covering the full width of the street. The footage Raymond reviewed showed Derek's car leaving his driveway at 8:30 Wednesday evening. It showed the same car returning at 10:15. The timestamps lined up exactly with what Simone had described, but there was something else on the footage that Carolyn had noticed, and Raymond confirmed. After pulling into the driveway at 10:15, Derek did not go inside. He sat in the car for 18 minutes. The interior light was off, but the phone screen illuminated his face twice during that period. Once when he appeared to receive a call, once when he initiated one. Raymond explained what that meant in practical terms. Phone records call logs duration. The numbers dialed can be subpoenaed in a civil proceeding. A judge issues the order to the carrier. The carrier produces the records. The process takes time, weeks or months, depending on the court's schedule and the carrier's compliance. But the process, he said, was already being set in motion. Carolyn's footage places Derek at the scene, Raymond said. It places him leaving before the injuries occurred and returning after, and it shows 18 minutes of deliberate phone activity immediately following. That is not the behavior of a man who acted impulsively and regretted it. That is the behavior of a man who had already decided what he was going to do next. I had nothing to say to that, so I said nothing. Raymond had also spoken with Caleb. Early Friday morning, before Caleb went back in to sit with Simone, Raymond had asked him a series of specific questions, dates, incidents, things Caleb had witnessed or been told over the past 4 years. Caleb had been reluctant at first. Reluctant in the way a person is when answering honestly means dismantling something they had been working hard to keep intact. But Raymond had asked with dates, specific ones. And when Caleb answered with those dates in front of him, a pattern emerged that was harder to dismiss than any individual incident had been on its own. Derek had not been reacting to Simone over 4 years. He had been consistent, methodical. The difference mattered, Raymond said, because consistency is a choice. It demonstrates intent. When someone hurts your child, Raymond said, and his voice did not change in tone, but something in its weight shifted. You can respond with anger, or you can respond with strategy. Anger feels better in the moment. Strategy is what wins. I thought about our father, about the wooden box and the 11 years of records, and the afternoon he walked into that office and set the box on the table. No raised voice, no ultimatum, just the accumulated weight of everything that had been done, documented and presented with care. There is one more thing, Raymond said, but I want to wait until I have confirmed it fully before I tell you. Give me until tomorrow morning. Raymond, I know, but this one I will not say until I am certain. What I will tell you is this. He paused. What happened to Simone on Wednesday night? It did not happen in a vacuum. Derek was not careful about everything. I asked him what that meant. It means, he said, that Wednesday night may not be the only thing we are dealing with here. But I need one more day. He ended the call before I could ask anything else. I stood at the window with the phone in my hand and looked out at the parking lot now fully lit in the morning sun. And I turned the last sentence over in my mind, the way I used to turn a piece of wood over in my hands in the workshop, feeling for the grain, for the place where the surface told you something the eye alone could not see. Not careful about everything. I did not know yet what shape that sentence was going to take. I only knew that Raymond had been building something since 3:30 in the morning 2 days ago, and that whatever he had found in the dark was larger than Wednesday night. I walked back toward Simone's room and reminded myself quietly and without much success that patience was the thing our father had tried to teach us both. Raymond had learned it well. I was still, after 67 years, working on it. Before I tell you what happened that Wednesday night, the moment everything finally broke open, I need to know you are still with me. Drop the number 9 in the comments right now. Just the number. That is all. Because what I am about to share next changed everything for this family, and I do not want you to miss it. A gentle note. The chapter ahead contains some fictional elements shaped for educational purposes. If that is not something you wish to continue with, this is a natural place to step away, no hard feelings at all. I waited until afternoon to speak with Simone about it. Not because Raymond had told me to wait, but because some conversations need daylight. Some things are too heavy to carry in the dark, and she had already carried more than enough of it. The room looked different in the afternoon light. Caleb had brought flowers from her colleagues at Harlow Falls Elementary, a wide mason jar of sunflowers, and something purple that I did not know the name of, sitting on the windowsill where the sun could reach them. Simone was sitting up in the bed with a pillow behind her lower back, the bruising on her jaw fading from purple to the particular yellow-green that means healing is underway. She looked tired in the deep way that goes past one night's sleep, but her eyes were clear. Caleb sat beside her on the edge of the bed, her hand in both of his. I pulled the chair close and sat down. I want to talk to you about something, I said, and I want you to know before I start that whatever you decide, nobody in this family is going to think any differently of you. Simone looked at me steadily. Tell me. I told her what Raymond had found. Not in legal language, I do not have that language, And even if I did, it was not what she needed from me. I told her in plain terms. A neighbor's camera had recorded Derek leaving and returning Wednesday night, the timestamps matching exactly what she had described. 18 minutes in the driveway afterward. Phone activity that could in time be traced through the courts. A pattern over 4 years that Raymond's people had helped him document. And 3 attorneys who had already mapped the legal terrain. I told her the evidence existed. I told her she had every right to use it. She was quiet for a long moment after I finished. Outside the window, the sunflowers caught the late afternoon light and held it. Caleb did not speak. He had been learning since Thursday morning that some things required him to be present without filling the space, and he was doing it well. "If I file a report," Simone said, "what happens to Derek?" I told her the truth that I did not know exactly. The legal system moves on its own logic, and I was not in a position to promise her an outcome. What I could tell her was that Raymond knew people who understood how to make sure a story was told correctly and completely, and that the evidence would be in the right hands. She nodded slowly. Then she looked out the window for a long time. Not the unfocused stare of someone who has left the room mentally, but the deliberate, inward look of a person working something through to its end before they speak. When she turned back, her voice was even. "I'm not doing this for me," she said. "I'm doing it because if I don't, he'll do it again. To someone else. Maybe to someone who doesn't have a Papa Jean to drive to in the middle of the night." I had to look away. I looked at the sunflowers on the windowsill, at the way the light was catching them, and I stayed there for a few seconds before I trusted myself to look back. "All right," when I said, "can you call them Raymond already has?" She nodded once the way she nods when something has been decided, and she is ready to move to the next thing. That particular quality of hers, the ability to make a decision and then simply inhabit it without second-guessing or circling back, was one of the first things I had noticed about her. Watching her now, I understood it had not come easily. It was the thing a person builds over years of choosing not to let difficulty undo them. The officer arrived 40 minutes later. She was a woman in her mid-40s, dark hair, pulled back a way of moving through the doorway that was efficient without being abrupt. She introduced herself to Simone first, then to Caleb, then acknowledged me with a nod and a quiet suggestion that I might be more comfortable waiting outside. I took the suggestion. The hallway was familiar by now. I had memorized the pattern of the floor tiles without intending to the way you absorb the details of a place, when you have spent too many hours in it waiting for things to resolve. I counted them anyway, starting from the door of Simone's room, the way Beverly used to count ceiling tiles. It gave my hands something to do that was not reaching for my phone. Nearly an hour passed. When the officer came out, she stopped and looked at me directly. Her expression was professional. She was not going to tell me anything. She was not required to tell me, and I understood that. But there was something in her eyes, something that settled in after a moment of quiet assessment, that told me she had heard this story before, that she knew the difference between the kind of account that has been rehearsed and the kind that has simply been lived. She gave me a single nod. I gave her one back. When I stepped into the room, Simone was asleep. The exhaustion had caught up with her the moment the officer left the body, releasing what the will had been holding in place for the past hour. Her breathing was slow and even. The bruising on her face looked less severe in the soft afternoon light than it had under the hospital's fluorescence. Caleb was still beside her. His hand rested on top of hers on the blanket. He looked up at me when I came in, and what I saw in his face was not the raw anger of Thursday morning. It was something quieter and more permanent, the expression of a man who has watched his wife do something difficult and has understood in watching it that he has not yet begun to know the full measure of her. I sat down in my chair. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I took it out and looked at the screen. A text from Raymond. 2 words, get ready. I read it 3 times. In 67 years, I had received a great many messages from my brother. Instructions, updates, reassurances. The occasional joke that landed better in text than it would have out loud. In all of that time, across all of those years, Raymond had never once sent me those 2 words. I put the phone face down on my knee and looked at Simone sleeping, and at Caleb sitting beside her, and at the sunflowers catching the last of the afternoon light on the windowsill. Whatever Raymond had confirmed the thing he had not been willing to name until he was certain now. I had been home less than 4 hours when Raymond called. I had not actually slept. I had been sitting in Beverly's chair in the kitchen with my eyes closed, letting the house hold me the way it does when I have nowhere else to go, and nothing left to do but wait. The coffee in my mug had gone cold. The recipe notebook was still on the table where I had left it Wednesday night, open to the honey peach cake page, as if the week had simply folded itself around that moment and returned me to it. The phone rang at 7 o'clock exactly. Raymond has always been precise about time. "You're home," he said, sitting in the kitchen. "Good. I need you to be sitting down for this." I told him I already was. He said good again, and then he began. He started with Carolyn's camera, not because it was the most important thing he had to tell me, but because Raymond builds the way our father built, from the foundation up, and the camera was the foundation. The footage showed Derek's car leaving his driveway at 8:30 Wednesday evening. It showed the same car pulling back in at 10:15. The timestamps placed Derek away from his home during the exact window Simone had described, and back at his home before she would have reached mine. Raymond had already provided a copy of the footage to the family attorney. A second copy was secured separately, but it was what happened after 10:15 that Raymond spent the most time on. After Derek pulled into the driveway, he did not go inside. The camera recorded him sitting in the car for 18 minutes. The interior was dark, but the phone screen illuminated his face on 2 separate occasions, once when he appeared to receive a call, and once when the screen activity suggested he had initiated one himself. "A man who acts in a moment of rage goes inside and pours himself a drink," Raymond said. "A man who sits in his car for 18 minutes making phone calls is a man who is already thinking about consequences." That distinction matters enormously, Gene. It goes to intent. It goes to premeditation. It changes the legal character of what happened on those stairs. I asked who Derek had called. Raymond said the subpoena process for the call records had been initiated through the civil attorney. It would take weeks, possibly longer, depending on the court's schedule and the carrier. But based on what his contact at the detective's office had been able to determine through other channels, the most likely recipient of at least one of those calls was Derek's personal attorney, a man he had retained for business matters for several years, a man calling his lawyer 18 minutes after assaulting a pregnant woman. Raymond was right. The distinction mattered. Then Raymond said, "There is something else I need to tell you. About Derek. Something that has nothing to do with Wednesday night, and everything to do with the man he has become." I put my coffee mug down on the table. He told me that 3 years ago, he had personally recommended Derek for a position on the board of the Harlow Falls Community Youth Foundation. He said this without softening it, in the same even tone he uses for everything. It was a mistake he had carried since, and he was not going to minimize it by dressing it in better language. He had recommended Derek because Derek was visible in the community, because his professional credentials were solid, and because Raymond had believed, or allowed himself to believe, that visibility and credentials were sufficient indicators of character. They were not sufficient indicators. He knew that now. In the first year of Derek's board tenure, Raymond had read the organization's publicly available annual financial report a standard Form 990, the document that all nonprofit organizations in the United States are required to file with the IRS and make available to the public. He had read it the way he reads everything carefully, with 32 years of pattern recognition running underneath the surface. The numbers had not lined up cleanly, not dramatically, not in a way that would be obvious to someone without training. But Raymond had spent 3 decades looking at financial documents in the context of criminal cases, and he recognized the particular texture of figures that had been managed rather than reported. He printed the report and kept it. The following year, he read the next report. Then the year after that. Each time he printed a copy and added it to a file he kept in his home office. He had not filed a formal complaint. He had not gone to the board. He had not said anything to Jean. "Why not?" I asked. "Because I had suspicion," Raymond said. "Not proof. A former prosecutor who acts on suspicion without proof is just a man making accusations. I needed the full picture before I handed it to anyone who could do something with it. And now you have it." I handed everything to the civil attorney Thursday night. 3 years of annual reports with the specific line items marked. The attorney reviewed them Friday and confirmed what I had identified. He paused in the way he pauses when the next sentence carries particular weight. Over a period of slightly more than 3 years, approximately $180,000 moved through that foundation in ways that do not correspond to any documented program expenditure, any approved grant, or any listed operational cost. $180,000 from a fund built to support the children of Harlow Falls. I sat in Beverly's kitchen in the early morning light, and I let that number settle into the room the way the name Derek had settled between Simone and me on Wednesday night quietly, with a weight that changed everything around it. "How long have you known?" I asked. Raymond was quiet for a moment. "I've suspected for approximately 2 years." "And you waited." It was not a question. He answered it anyway. "I waited until it was necessary," he said. "That is what Papa taught us. You do not use what you have until you actually need it. When you need it, you have it ready. When you do not need it yet, you build it carefully, and you keep it safe." I looked at the recipe notebook on the table. Beverly's handwriting on the open page, the same page it had been opened to when Simone arrived on my porch Wednesday night. I thought about our father and his wooden box, about the 11 years of patience and the afternoon he walked into an office and set everything he had built on a table and let it speak. It seemed to me in that moment that the kitchen was not as empty as it usually is at 7 in the morning, that somewhere in the particular quality of the light, or in the familiar smell of coffee and old wood, our father was sitting in a chair I could not see, in the way the dead sometimes occupy a room when the living are finally doing what they should have done sooner. Raymond kept talking, and I kept listening, and outside the kitchen window, the morning continued. On the way mornings do, entirely indifferent to the fact that the world inside my house had just rearranged itself around a single number, $180,000. He laid it out the way he lays everything out in sequence without editorializing, letting the facts carry their own weight. Over slightly more than 3 years, that sum had moved through the Harlow Falls Community Youth Foundation in ways that corresponded to no documented program, no approved grant, no listed operational expenditure. The discrepancies appeared consistently during the periods when Derek held direct management authority over the foundation's fundraising accounts. Raymond had copies of every annual report, 3 years of Form 990 filings, each one printed and dated and annotated in the margins with the specific line items that did not reconcile. He had handed all of it to the civil attorney Thursday night. The attorney had spent Friday reviewing the documents. By Friday evening, she had confirmed Raymond's analysis and moved to the next stage. The materials would be submitted to the IRS, which has investigative authority over nonprofit Organizations and their required annual disclosures, and separately to the State Attorney General's office, which in this state holds supervisory jurisdiction over charitable organizations operating within its borders. Both processes had been initiated. Neither would move quickly, but they were moving. What happens when those processes conclude? I asked. Civilly, the Foundation can pursue recovery of the misappropriated funds. Derek could be removed from any board position and barred from serving in similar roles. The civil attorney is also examining whether there are grounds for a personal judgment against him. Raymond paused. Criminally, embezzlement of this scale from a nonprofit is a felony in this state. Whether the district attorney chooses to prosecute will depend on what the investigation produces. If the funds moved through electronic transfers, and they almost certainly did, there may also be federal wire fraud exposure. That is not something that gets resolved in the next few months. But it is something that has been set in motion. I asked him where the money had gone. He said there was no official conclusion yet. The documentation showed where it had left the Foundation. Where it had gone after that was part of what the investigation would determine. What he could say was that the pattern of withdrawals aligned precisely with a period during which Derek had been publicly celebrated for his community leadership, the Chamber of Commerce Award. The photograph in the local paper, the handshake with the mayor that I had attended and applauded. $180,000 from a fund built to support the children of this town. I stood up from the table and walked to the window. Outside on Callaway Street, a neighbor was walking a dog past the oak tree in the front yard. A car moved slowly down the road. Somewhere down the block, a lawnmower started up. Harlow Falls was waking into a Saturday morning, the way it always does, without urgency, without drama, entirely unaware of what was being said inside this kitchen. I thought about our father. Not for the first time this week, I had been thinking about him since Raymond first said what Papa taught us on the phone Thursday night. But now I thought about him differently. I thought about the specific arithmetic of his patience. 3 years of gathering, 11 years of a company's wrongdoing, documented one form at a time in a wooden box kept under a workbench. A settlement of $180,000, the same number. I had not registered it consciously until this moment standing at the window with the phone pressed to my ear. Our father had recovered $180,000 for 23 workers who had been cheated. And now Raymond had assembled $180,000 in documented evidence of what Derek had taken from the children of this community. I do not believe in coincidence as a governing principle, but I believe in the idea that certain kinds of truth have a shape, and that shape sometimes recurs. Raymond, I said, you've been carrying this for 2 years. I have. Alone. There was no point in sharing a suspicion, he said. A suspicion is only a burden. Evidence is something you can use. I came back to the table and sat down. The recipe notebook was still open in front of me. Beverly's handwriting on the honey peach cake page, the same page it had been on when Simone collapsed on my porch 4 days ago. I looked at it, and I thought about Derek at 44 years old, and about the boy I had carried on my shoulders once a long time ago on a summer afternoon in a yard that no longer belonged to anyone I knew. Raymond said, Derek has spent 4 years building something in this family gene. He believed he was building walls. What he was actually doing was constructing a case against himself, one deliberate act at a time. We now have the complete record. What happens next? Now we let the systems do their work. The police report has been filed. The civil attorney has everything. Carolyn has confirmed she will provide the footage. The IRS referral is being processed. The AG notification has gone out. He paused. Derek does not yet know the full scope of what has been assembled. When will he? Soon. And Jean? His voice did not change in pitch, but something in it settled the way a room settles when the last window has been closed against the wind. He will be surprised. Men like Derek always believe that what they do in private will remain private. He is about to learn what Papa understood and tried to teach us. That truth, carefully documented and patiently pursued, does not need to raise its voice. I put the phone down on the table after we said goodbye. I sat in the kitchen for a long time without moving. I thought about my father and the wooden box, and the afternoon he walked into that office and simply placed it on the table. I thought about the settlement money and the 2 tuition checks it had helped cover, and the particular quiet satisfaction on our father's face that had nothing to do with victory and everything to do with completion. Then I thought about Derek, my firstborn son, 44 years old. The infant I had held in the hospital 36 years before Caleb arrived, not knowing yet what kind of man he would become, not knowing what any of us would become. I was not glad. That is the honest answer. I was not glad in the way I might have expected to be if I had been told this story about someone else's family. What I felt was something slower and heavier and more permanent than gladness. A grief that I understood was going to be with me for a long time, sitting alongside the knowledge that what was happening was right. Both of those things were true at the same time. I had not expected that. But I was 67 years old, and I had learned imperfectly and over many years that the most important truths are rarely simple. The 5 days between Simone filing her report and the police knocking on Derek's door were the quietest 5 days of my life. Not peaceful quiet. There is a difference. Peaceful means the noise has gone away. Quiet means you are holding your breath and counting. And every ordinary thing you do feels like a performance of normalcy that neither the performer nor the audience entirely believes. I went to the grocery store on Monday morning. I bought coffee and bread and the orange marmalade Beverly used to spread on her biscuits, the kind I still buy out of a habit too old to break, though I eat it alone now, and it tastes different than it used to. I tended the garden along the side of the house, the one Beverly planted the last spring she was well enough to get down on her knees in the dirt. I pruned back the rosemary that had gone leggy over the summer. I swept the front porch. I did the things that hands can do when the mind needs to be kept from running ahead of itself. Every time my phone vibrated on the counter, my heart moved before my hand did. At night, I brought the recipe notebook to the table. Not the way I had been bringing it all these years, not as a way of reaching for Beverly in the dark. Something had shifted in how I thought about it. It had been forming slowly since the morning I understood what Simone had done in choosing that honey peach cake, the deliberateness of it, the weight she had carried into my kitchen, without knowing what it would mean to me. I sat with the notebook open under the kitchen light and thought about what I wanted to do with it. I was not ready yet. But the idea was they're taking shape in the way that quiet ideas do when you give them enough room. Simone was discharged from the hospital Sunday afternoon. I did not go that day. She needed the first night in her own house to be just her and Caleb, without anyone else in the room whose presence required managing. I understood that. I stayed home and sat on the porch until the light went, and then I went inside and did not sleep well and did not expect to. I went Tuesday. Caleb answered the door. He had shaved and changed his shirt, and from the outside he looked composed, the particular composure of a man who has decided that holding himself together is the most useful thing he can offer the people around him. But I have known my younger son for 36 years, and I saw what it was costing him. The tightness around his eyes, the way his jaw sat slightly forward, the way it does when he is carrying something heavy and has been carrying it long enough that the weight has become part of his posture. He stepped back and said Simone was in the living room. I walked through the entryway and stopped at the edge of the hallway. Simone was standing to greet me. What stopped me was not that she was standing, it was where. She was at the foot of the staircase, not passing through, not caught mid-movement, standing there with the full awareness of what that spot of floor represented, looking directly at me as I came around the corner. She did not step away from it. She did not glance up the stairs. She looked at me with an expression that was not performance and not bravery in any theatrical sense, but something quieter and more permanent, a statement directed at the space itself, at the particular geometry of that hallway where the worst of this had happened. I was here. I got up. I am still standing. I did not say anything about it. I crossed the hallway and put my arms around her, carefully mindful of her ribs. She rested her chin on my shoulder. We stood there in that entryway for a moment, without speaking, and it was the right thing to do. And it was enough. Sunday morning, I went to First Grace Church the way I go every Sunday. Same pew, same time. The congregation has known me long enough that my presence or absence registers without comment, the kind of community belonging that accumulates over decades without anyone deciding it should. Carolyn was seated 3 rows ahead. She turned when I came in, the natural movement of someone registering a new presence nearby. Our eyes met across the rows of wooden pews and the particular morning light that comes through First Grace's east windows on a clear day. She did not smile, and she did not nod with any emphasis. She held my gaze for one steady beat, with an expression that said what it needed to say. Without requiring any words from either of us, I did the right thing. And Jean, so did you. I looked back for the same beat. Then we both turned forward as the organ began. I thought about her during the first hymn. She had lived 2 houses from Derek for years, close enough to know him by the version he presented to a community that was inclined to think well of him, and close enough to see the things that version did not account for. The moments that did not fit the surface, the accumulation of small observations that sit quietly in a person's mind for years without adding up to anything actionable, until one morning the phone rings and someone asks the right question, and suddenly everything lines up. Raymond had asked the right question, and Carolyn, after a silence long enough to mean something, had decided to answer it. That decision had not been without cost. In a town the size of Harlow Falls, providing evidence against a neighbor is not a neutral act. She had done it anyway, because there are people in every community who understand that doing the right thing is not the same as doing the easy thing, and who have made their peace with that distinction. I respected her for it in a way I would not easily find words for. The week moved through its days. Monday's ordinariness, Tuesday's visit, Wednesday. I drove past Harlow Falls Elementary without planning to, and slowed at the sight of the lower building's windows. The small chairs, the arrangement of a 3rd-grade classroom. Simone's room was on that side of the building. I drove on without stopping. Thursday afternoon, I was on the front porch when the phone vibrated on the wooden rail beside me. One message from Raymond. One word. Today. I set the phone down and looked at Callaway Street. The oak tree unchanged. A car moving past at the speed of a Thursday afternoon. The mimosa at the edge of the yard, still dropping its blossoms the way Beverly always said it did, trying too hard to be noticed. Somewhere in Harlow Falls, on a street 2 miles from where I was sitting, someone was walking up a driveway and raising a hand to knock on a door. I did not need to be there. I had understood that from the beginning. 2 hours later, Raymond called. His voice was what it always is, even unhurried, giving nothing away in its surface. But I have known that voice for 67 years. I know the difference between calm that is simply calm and calm that is managing something underneath it. This was the second kind. We are halfway through this story now, and the hardest part is already behind us. But what comes next is just as important, the part where a family learns what justice actually looks like up close. If you are still here, leave the word "still" in the comments. It tells me more than you know. Quick note. Some details in the chapters ahead are fictional included to give this story its full shape. If you would prefer to stop here, that is completely understood, but the message waiting at the end is one I think you will want to hear. Raymond told me himself, not through Caleb, not filtered through anyone else. He said he wanted me to hear it directly, because there are things a father needs to receive without a buffer between him and the information. I had sat down in Beverly's chair before he even started speaking. He said that when the officers knocked on Derek's door Thursday afternoon, Derek opened it with the expression of a man who had not been expecting company. Not the careful blankness of someone bracing for something they had been anticipating. Genuine surprise, the kind that lives in the body before the mind has time to manage it. Raymond said he had seen that expression many times in 32 years of prosecution work. He knew what it meant. It meant Derek had spent the past 5 days telling himself a story, that this was a family matter, the kind that gets handled quietly and then filed away. The way uncomfortable things between people who share a name tend to get handled when no one pushes hard enough to change that pattern. He had not understood that this time, someone had been keeping records. Derek asked for his attorney before the officers finished their opening sentence. Calmly, politely, with the practiced composure of a man who understands how formal situations work and how to present himself within them. Not because he was frightened, because he was already thinking about the next move. The officers were professional. They followed procedure. Derek was cooperative in the specific way that means a person is cooperating with their own interests rather than with the process, which is a distinction Raymond said any experienced officer recognizes immediately. The following morning, Derek's attorney sent a letter. Raymond described it as the kind of letter that is written to establish a position rather than to communicate dense formal, designed to suggest that any further action would be met with significant resistance. Raymond read it over his morning coffee and then called the civil attorney. The response that went back was, in Raymond's words, considerably longer. I listened to all of it. I heard the part about Derek's face at the door, and the part about the attorney's letter, and the part about the civil response that was already in motion. I heard it the way you hear something that is happening to your family and to a stranger at the same time. Because the person Raymond was describing shared a name with my son, but did not match the version of my son that I had held in my mind for 44 years. Those two people had been living in the same body for a long time, and tonight was the first time I was fully required to see only one of them. I told Raymond about the day Derek was born. I do not know exactly why I told him Raymond was there. He remembers it as well as I do. But I needed to say it out loud to someone who had been present. The old hospital on the east side of Harlow Falls, the one they tore down 12 years ago to build the current facility. Beverly had been in labor for 19 hours. When it was over, she was exhausted in a way I had never seen her exhausted before. And she was smiling in a way I had never seen her smile before either. I stood with Derek in my arms beside her bed, and my hands were shaking. And I did not tell her that because she had enough to manage without worrying about me. Every parent who has ever held a newborn has believed in that moment that the child will be good. Not perfect, not without struggle, but fundamentally, essentially oriented toward good. I had believed that. I had gone on believing it long past the point where the evidence suggested I should have looked more carefully. Raymond was quiet while I said all of this. When I finished, he said, "You couldn't have known it would come to this, Gene." Nutaktin, I said. But I knew something was wrong. I knew it for years, and I chose not to look directly at it, because he was my son, and because Beverly loved him, and because it was easier to keep hoping he would come around on his own. I paused. That's on me, Ray. It was the first time I had said that out loud, to anyone including myself. And saying it, putting it into actual words in an actual conversation, did something to the weight I had been carrying. Did not remove it, but shifted it into a shape that was at least honest and I had learned from 67 years of living that honesty, even when it costs something, sits lighter than its alternative. After I put the phone down, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then I picked it up again and found Derek's name and called it. 4 rings. He answered on the 5th, just before it would have gone to voicemail. His voice was careful and flat, the voice of a man speaking through a layer of glass. "Dad, I'm not calling to argue with you," I said. "I'm not calling to threaten you. I'm calling because you are my son, and I need you to know that I am aware of what happened. All of it, and that I am choosing Simone and Caleb and that baby. Not because I don't love you." I stopped. But because that is what being a father actually means. Derek said nothing for a long moment. The silence on his end was not the silence of someone processing something new. It was the silence of a man who had already decided that words in this situation were a liability. He ended the call without speaking. I set the phone on the table and looked at it. There was nothing more to say to it. Whatever Derek and I were going to become to each other after tonight, it was not going to be resolved in a phone call, and I had not expected it to be. I had made the call because it was the true thing to do, and because a man who claims to have principles is only as credible as the moments when following them costs him something. Caleb called near 10 o'clock. His voice was steadier than it had been in days, the steadiness of a person who has arrived at a decision and is now living inside it rather than debating it. He told me he and Derek would not be speaking for some time. I told him I understood. He said Raymond had told him about the $180,000, about the foundation, about the 2 years Raymond had spent building the record before he used it. I said that Raymond had carried that the way our father would have carried it. There was a silence between us. The comfortable kind, the kind that only exists between people who have known each other long enough that silence is not an absence, but a presence. Then Caleb said, "Simone and I have been talking about a name for the baby. In a town the size of Harlow Falls, news does not travel, it settles. Like dust after a storm, it lands on every surface and stays there. And you can see it on people's faces before they say a word to you." The Sunday morning service at First Grace was the first time I had been among a larger group of people since everything had become public. I had not announced anything. I had not spoken to anyone outside of family and Raymond. But Harlow Falls is small enough that the absence of a statement is its own kind of statement. And by the time I walked through First Grace's doors that morning, the dust had already settled on most of the people in that room. What I noticed was not pity. It was not the careful avoidance of a community that does not know what to say. It was something closer to recognition, the specific quality of attention that people give a person when they have revised their understanding of that person upward, without being entirely sure how to express it. I nodded at the people I always nodded at. I took my usual pew. I did not explain anything to anyone because there was nothing left to explain that was mine to explain. After the service, Carolyn found me near the door. She took my hand in both of hers, a firm, warm grip, the handshake of a woman who means what her hands say. She looked at me directly and said, "Sean Beverly would have been very proud of you." I did not answer. I could not for a moment find the words that would have been adequate. I nodded, and she seemed to understand that the nod was carrying more weight than it appeared to. And she squeezed my hand once and let it go. I thought about that sentence for the rest of the morning. The formal announcement came from the Harlow Falls Chamber of Commerce on a Tuesday. A brief public statement that Derek Whitfield had been suspended from all affiliated roles pending the outcome of an ongoing investigation. The language was neutral and institutional, the kind of language that organizations use when they want to say something without saying it. But in a town like Harlow Falls, people know how to read between those lines. They have been reading between those lines their whole lives. I was at the hardware store on Wednesday when I overheard two men I recognized from chamber events talking quietly near the fastener's aisle. I did not catch all of it. I caught enough. One of them said something about a board meeting 2 years ago, where Derek had presented numbers that did not match what another member had independently calculated. The other man said he had thought about that meeting more than once since. They moved on when they saw me not with embarrassment, but with the slightly weighted nod of men who understood, without discussion, that I was present and that this was appropriate to acknowledge. I did not say anything to either of them. I bought what I came for and went home. This is what our father understood, that most people learn too late if they learn it at all. You do not need to announce the truth. You do not need to argue for it, or defend it, or campaign on its behalf. You need to document it carefully, keep it safe, and release it at the right moment. After that, it does its own work. The community of Harlow Falls was not reacting to anything I had said. They were reacting to what they had always partially seen, but never had sufficient reason to look at directly. The investigation had given them that reason. Now they were looking. I drove home and sat at the kitchen table in the late afternoon light. Same chair, same table, same view out the window that I had been looking at for 31 years. I took Beverly's recipe notebook from the counter and set it in front of me and opened it to the first page. Not the honey peach cake page, not any particular recipe. The first page, which had Beverly's name written in her own hand, at the top the way she had written it when she first bought the book, before she had filled it with anything. Just her name. Just the fact of her. I thought about what she would say if she were sitting across from me tonight. I did not think she would say anything at all. I thought she would pour herself a coffee and sit down and put her hand over mine on the table the way she used to when something had been hard and was now finally behind us. My phone vibrated on the table. A message from Raymond. I read it once, then again. Civil matter resolved. Derek removed from all positions. Full audit ordered by the board under AG directive. IRS referral officially filed and accepted. The documentation did its work. A pause between that line and the next visible even in a text message. Papa would have liked how this ended. I set the phone down, for the first time in several weeks, in longer than I could accurately measure, because the counting had started before Simone appeared on my porch, and I had not fully recognized it as counting. At the time I felt something in my chest that was not grief and was not anger, and was not the complicated amalgam of both that I had been carrying since Wednesday night. It was the particular quiet of a thing that has been done correctly. Not happiness, not the sharp satisfaction of a victory. Something slower and more durable than either of those, the feeling of a man who has lived long enough to understand that doing the right thing and feeling good about it are not always the same experience, and that the doing matters more than the feeling. My father had understood that. He had built his whole life around it. I sat with it for a while and let it be what it was. The phone vibrated again. Caleb this time. I answered and heard something in his voice I had not heard since before all of this began, a lightness, a quality of air in his words that had been absent for weeks. He sounded like a man who has been holding a breath for a very long time and has just finally let it go. "Dad," he said, "Simone wants to tell you something. Can you come over tomorrow morning?" Maple Drive on a Sunday morning looks exactly like the kind of street where nothing bad could happen. Wide sidewalks, old oak trees with roots that have been lifting the concrete for decades, houses with covered porches and flower beds that somebody tends with regularity. I had driven this street 100 times. That morning, I noticed every tree individually, the way you notice things when you have been reminded that the ordinary world is more fragile and more durable than it appears. I parked at the curb and sat in the car for a moment before getting out. Not because I needed to prepare myself for anything, but because I wanted to register the difference. The last time I had been on this street, under circumstances that mattered. It had been a Wednesday night in my memory, reconstructed from Simone's account. Dark quiet, a door being answered that should have stayed closed. This morning the sun was coming in from the east, and a neighbor 2 houses down was retrieving her newspaper from the end of her driveway, and a dog was barking somewhere behind a fence in the unhurried way of a dog with nothing urgent to communicate. I got out of the car and walked up to the door and knocked the way you knock when you are a guest arriving for breakfast. Caleb opened it. He was wearing an apron, the canvas one with the wide front pocket that Simone had given him 2 birthdays ago, and there was a faint smell of toasted bread and butter coming from somewhere behind him. He looked like a man who had recently remembered how to breathe. Not all the way back to himself yet, but moving in that direction with intention. "She's in the kitchen," he said, and stepped back to let me in. I came through the door and stopped at the edge of the entryway. The locket of the hallway looked the same as it always had. The same pale walls, the same runner rug, the same coat hooks beside the door. But on the narrow shelf to the right of the staircase, where there had been nothing, before Caleb had placed a small vase of yellow flowers, sunflowers and something smaller and orange that I did not know the name of, arranged simply without fuss. The kind of thing someone does not, because it solves anything, but because they need to put something living in a space that held something dark. And flowers are what you reach for when words are not sufficient. I looked at the vase for a moment. Caleb said nothing. He did not need to. I nodded once and followed him into the kitchen. Simone was standing at the counter pouring coffee into 3 mugs, and the first thing I noticed was her face. The bruising was gone fully. The jaw and eye socket returned to themselves. She looked rested in a way I had not seen her look since before all of this started, maybe longer. Her eyes were clear, and there was something in her expression that I recognized as the particular brightness of a person carrying good news they have been waiting to deliver. She set the mugs on the table and we all sat down. The breakfast Caleb had made was simple toast butter, a jar of jam with a handwritten label from somewhere local, sliced fruit. The kind of meal that does not announce itself, but is exactly right for the moment it occupies. We talked the way people talk, when the weight has lifted enough to let ordinary conversation back in, slowly at first, then with more ease. Caleb mentioned a project at work. Simone described a letter she had received from a parent of one of her students, written by hand, on good stationery, saying they hoped she would be back in the classroom soon. I talked about the garden and the rosemary that had come back stronger after I pruned it hard. At some point, I realized I had stopped monitoring the conversation for anything that required managing and was simply in it. I had not been simply in a conversation for several weeks. It felt like something returning to its proper temperature. Before I left, Simone walked with me to the door. We came to a stop in the entryway near the coat hooks near the narrow shelf with the yellow flowers. The same geography, the same floor, different light, different morning, different everything that the same space can hold when enough time has moved through it. She looked at me in the direct way she has always had, the look that does not look away from things. "I've been thinking about a name," she said. "Tell me." "Eleanor." She said it simply without build-up. "After your Beverly." I turned toward the door. Not away from her, not in any sense of retreat. I just needed somewhere to put my eyes for a moment. That was not her face, because her face would have required me to respond before I was ready to respond. The door. The grain of the wood. The small pane of glass at eye level with the morning coming through it. Simone was quiet. She is perceptive enough to understand when a person needs a moment that is theirs alone, and generous enough to give it without making them ask. Beverly Eleanor. Beverly, who had filled this family with warmth and order and the smell of something good on the stove, and who had left a recipe notebook and a garden and a lamp with an amber bulb that I had never been able to change. Beverly, who had known things about our sons that I had not known how to see. I turned back. "It's a good name," I said. My voice was level. I was proud of that. Simone smiled, not a wide smile, but the real kind, the kind that starts in the eyes before it reaches anything else. She put her hand on my arm for a moment, and then let it go, and I walked down the front steps into the Sunday morning. The drive home was quiet. One hand on the wheel. Sunlight through the windshield in the particular way of late morning light that is almost gold, but not quite. I thought about Beverly, and something she had said once that I had never forgotten, that the best names are the ones given from love rather than tradition, that a name given from love carries its meaning differently. When I got home, I went directly to the kitchen. I opened the second drawer beside the stove. I took out the recipe notebook, the brown leather cover soft at the edges. Beverly's name on the first page in her own careful cursive. I found a piece of cloth in the drawer beneath it, a square of brown cotton that Beverly had kept for wrapping things that mattered. She had used it for a pocket watch that had belonged to her father, for a bracelet she saved for a decade before giving it to a niece. I wrapped the notebook in it carefully the way she would have wrapped it. And I put it aside. Not away aside. In the place on the counter where things go when they are waiting for the right moment to be given. I knew what the moment was. I just had to wait for it. The law moves at its own pace, and there is nothing you can do to hurry it. I learned that from my father, who spent 3 years building a case inside a cedar box before anyone in authority took a single phone call. I used to think his patience was a form of surrender. Standing in my kitchen one September morning, watching the light come through Beverly's curtains at an angle I had seen 10,000 times, I finally understood it was the most precise kind of power a quiet man can wield. The months between Simone's formal complaint and the conclusion of Derek's criminal proceedings moved the way autumn moves through Harlow Falls, gradual, then irreversible, then gone. First one oak tree on Millbrook Road lost its color. Then another. Then the whole street turned copper and gold before the wind took it all down in a single, indifferent week. I watched that process from my truck window 3 mornings in a row and thought about how a thing can look its most beautiful in the moment it is letting go. The district attorney's office accepted a diversion agreement for Derek in early October. That is the correct legal term, diversion. It means the criminal case is set aside from formal conviction if the defendant meets every condition of the agreement within the required period. For Derek, those conditions were 18 months of supervised probation, mandatory enrollment in a violence intervention program offering structured psychological counseling, regular check-ins with an assigned probation officer, a complete no-contact order with Simone, and a permanent prohibition from holding any position of authority over organizational finances. He had no prior criminal record. The prosecutor told Raymond that with a defense attorney of Derek's caliber, a diversion agreement was the most durable outcome, harder to unravel on appeal, more likely to be completed in full. I sat with that word for a long time. Diversion. It sounded like a highway sign, the kind that appears when the main road is closed and sends you somewhere else entirely, never quite through the original path. I let it sit at the kitchen table beside Beverly's recipe notebook and did not rush to a conclusion. Beverly always said that the first thing a person feels about a legal result is rarely the thing they will feel in 6 months. She was usually right. The evidence that supported the agreement was unambiguous. Carolyn's security camera showed Derek's car leaving the property at 8:30 in the evening and confirmed its return at 10:15 that same night. The 18 minutes he spent parked outside before entering the house, during which the phone screen inside the car illuminated twice, were captured in clear, time-stamped footage. Simone's testimony was consistent, specific, and given without hesitation. Her medical records documented 2 cracked ribs, a dislocated right index finger requiring manual reduction and splinting, and visible contusions on her cheek and jaw. The attending physician's notes included a fetal Doppler confirmation at 9 weeks, which meant the documented injuries had occurred in the presence of a known pregnancy. All of it was submitted as supporting documentation for the diversion agreement. Raymond explained that evidence assembled this cleanly combined with a victim who gave a formal, coherent statement, left the DA's office very little room to negotiate a lighter arrangement. The diversion agreement, he said carefully, was not a failure of the system. It was the system choosing the path most likely to produce compliance rather than risking an acquittal on a procedural technicality. I heard every word of his reasoning. I understood it. My disappointment was not in the outcome itself. It was in realizing how precisely a man could calculate his way through the consequences of what he had chosen to do. The civil matter moved on a separate track entirely. The lawsuit concerning the $180,000 was heard in Harlow Falls County Civil Court over approximately 11 weeks. The audit completed by the Foundation's board, under the directive of the State Attorney General's office, confirmed a systematic pattern of irregular fund transfers during Derek's 3-year tenure as finance chair. The documentation Raymond had assembled annotated Form 990 filings, board meeting minutes, wire transfer records, and correspondence was handed to the civil attorney and accepted without challenge. Derek settled out of court before the case reached a full hearing. The specific terms were sealed, but Raymond told me the settlement included complete financial restitution to the Foundation, all attorneys' fees, and a formal written agreement barring Derek from serving in any leadership or financial capacity for any registered nonprofit organization in the state for a period of 5 years. His suspension from the Harlow Falls Chamber of Commerce became permanent and was noted in their public meeting record. The IRS referral remained open as of October, pending their own independent review. Raymond cautioned me that the federal process does not move like the state courts. It moves like a glacier, consistently without announcement, and with considerable weight behind it. Caleb and Derek did not speak for 4 months. I know because Caleb told me one evening in late September, sitting on my back porch with a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands. He said it quietly, the way you say something when you have arrived at a kind of peace with it, but still want another person to hold it alongside you for a moment. He did not cry. He looked at the oak tree in the yard and asked me if I thought the silence between them would ever close. I told him honestly that I did not know. Some silences close, I said. Some become rooms that a person learns to walk carefully around for the rest of their life. I visited Raymond twice during those months. His house on the east side of town is modest for a man with 32 years of prosecutorial history, a small colonial with a reading lamp always burning in the front window, winter or summer. We drank decaf at his kitchen table both times, and he did not recap the legal proceedings unless I asked. He asked about Beverly's garden. He asked whether I was sleeping. He asked once, carefully, whether I was proud of Derek. I told him I loved Derek. He nodded once and did not press further. There are things a man who has spent 3 decades inside a courtroom understands about the distance between love and pride that I did not need to translate into words. Simone had her 20-week ultrasound in late September. Eleanor was confirmed healthy. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a steady heartbeat on the monitor, a face already turning toward the sound of Caleb's voice in the room. He sent me the photograph that afternoon. I placed it on the refrigerator door beside a photograph of Beverly, standing in this kitchen, laughing at something just beyond the frame of the camera. In early October, I pulled my truck to the shoulder of Millbrook Road and watched the oak trees release their leaves in a slow, deliberate sequence, as if each one had selected its own moment to let go. The light was low and amber. I sat there for several minutes without moving. I was not sad. I was not at peace. I was in that particular state of stillness that arrives when a man has done everything within reach and released the rest to time. My phone rang. Simone's name appeared on the screen. When I answered, her voice was unsteady in a way I recognized immediately, not fear, but the focused concentration of a person holding something very important, still long enough to say it clearly. Papa Jean, she said. It's time. Eleanor Grace arrived on a Tuesday, in October, 7 pounds and 6 ounces, apparently quite certain she had somewhere important to be. That was the first thing I noticed about her, that certainty. She entered the world the way Beverly used to enter a room, as though she had always belonged there, and the rest of us were simply catching up. I was sitting in the waiting room when it happened. The same kind of plastic chair I had sat in before in this same building. In a different kind of October one that had smelled like antiseptic and dread. This time the light through the window was different. It came in low and golden, the particular amber of late afternoon in Harlow Falls, when the town seems to pause before the evening arrives, unsure of whether it wants the day to end. Raymond was beside me. He had driven straight from his house when I sent the message, arriving 20 minutes after I did, saying nothing beyond a quiet greeting before taking the chair to my left. We sat the way the two of us have learned to sit together over the years, without needing to fill the air. Raymond had a paper cup of coffee he did not drink. I had my hands in my lap. The clock on the wall moved with the same indifference it always has. Caleb came out after 2 hours. I saw him before he reached us. His face was wet, and his smile was wider than anything I had seen on it before, not the careful, measured expression he had worn through the months of legal proceedings, not the composed look he maintained on my porch in September. This was something older and newer at the same time. He did not say a word. He walked to where we were sitting and simply nodded his jaw tight with the effort of containing something too large for the hallway. Raymond placed his hand briefly on Caleb's shoulder. I stood up. That was all the conversation any of us needed. The room was quiet when I entered. The nurses had dimmed the overhead lights, and the October afternoon came through the window at a long, generous angle. Simone was propped against the pillows, looking exhausted in the specific way that belongs only to people who have just done something extraordinary. There was a brightness underneath the exhaustion, something awake in her eyes that I had not seen before, or perhaps had seen once years ago. The first Sunday, she sat at my kitchen table and laughed at something Caleb said about the biscuits. Caleb was standing near the window holding a small bundle in a white blanket. He turned when I came in. I stopped at the doorway. There are moments a person cannot walk through quickly. You feel the weight of them in the soles of your feet before your mind has a chance to name what is happening. I stood at that door and understood without any particular reasoning that I was at the edge of something I had been moving toward for a long time. Caleb crossed the room and placed Eleanor in my arms. She was so small. I had forgotten in the way that time makes you forget physical realities how small a new person is. 7 pounds and 6 ounces, I had read the number on the message Caleb sent. But reading a number and holding that weight are entirely different experiences. I carried her to the window without meaning to the way my feet had made decisions for me all my life in the moments that mattered most. Outside, Harlow Falls was moving into evening. The streetlights along 2nd Street were beginning to come on one by one, as they had done every October evening for the 31 years I had lived in this town. The oak trees on Millbrook Road had gone copper and bare. A few last leaves moved in the wind, with no urgency at all, simply drifting. I thought about my father and the cedar box he kept under his workbench for 3 years. I thought about Raymond answering his phone on the second ring at 2 in the morning, calm as a man who had been waiting for exactly that call. I thought about Simone driving 25 minutes alone through the dark with 2 cracked ribs, stopping twice on Route 9, arriving at my porch and whispering my name. I thought about all the things this family had carried quietly without announcement. The way Beverly always said the most important things are carried, not displayed. And I thought about Beverly, about the fact that she was not standing at this window. Simone spoke from the bed. Her voice was soft and careful, the way you speak when you are holding something fragile inside the words themselves. Papa Jean, she said. We want to name her Eleanor, after Beverly, if that's all right with you. I did not answer right away. I kept my face toward the window. Outside, the last of the October light was settling across the rooftops of Harlow Falls, that slow, amber fade that Beverly used to watch from our own kitchen window, saying it was her favorite hour because everything looked like it was being remembered rather than seen. Eleanor was asleep in my arms, her breath even and small and entirely certain of itself. I stood there for a long moment, long enough for the streetlight directly below the window to flicker once and hold, long enough for Raymond, still in the hallway, to understand, without being told, that this was not a moment to interrupt. Then Eleanor opened her eyes. It was not a long look. Newborns do not focus the way older eyes do, I knew that. But for a moment she was still, and her gaze moved in my direction. And there was something in the quality of that attention that I recognized. It was the look Raymond gets when he is listening to something more carefully than his expression suggests. It was the look Beverly had when she understood something deeper than what had been said aloud. It runs in the family. I had not known until that moment that it ran this far. I turned back toward the room. Simone was watching me from the bed. Caleb had one hand on her shoulder. "Beverly," I said, and my voice was not entirely steady, "would have loved that very much." That Thursday morning, before Caleb and Simone left the hospital, I drove to Maple Drive alone. I had the spare key and 2 hours, and I knew exactly how I wanted to use them. I arrived at the house on Maple Drive an hour before they were expected home from the hospital. The October light came through the front windows at the angle you only ever see in autumn long, golden and unhurried, as though it had made a deliberate decision to stay. I stood in the doorway a moment before stepping inside just to take it in. I let myself in with the spare key and moved through the rooms without rushing. I restocked the refrigerator with things Simone would want in her first day's home soup bread, the mild tea she had mentioned once, that she preferred when she was tired. I replaced the bed linens with the set I had washed the evening before. I positioned the baby rocker in the living room at the angle where the afternoon sun comes through the west window and settles on the floor in a warm, steady stripe. I had noted that angle on an earlier visit and wanted Eleanor's first afternoon home to include it. Then I unwrapped Beverly's notebook from the brown cloth slowly and carefully. The leather cover was worn at the corners from 40 years of daily use. I placed it on the kitchen counter in the spot where the morning light first lands the corner nearest the window. No note, no explanation attached. Beverly never explained the important things she placed in the right spots around a home. She trusted that love was its own instruction and that the right person would always understand. Simone came through the front door 20 minutes later, moving with the careful deliberateness of someone still learning the shape of her own body after labor. She stopped just inside the entrance. She looked at the small vase of yellow flowers still on the shelf at the baby rocker, positioned in its stripe of afternoon light. Then she looked toward the kitchen and saw the notebook. She crossed the room and picked it up with both hands. Steady at first, then not entirely. She opened to the first page and looked at Beverly's handwriting, the date recorded in the upper corner. 40 years old, the ink faded slightly at the edges. She was not reading a recipe. She was reading proof that a woman had stood in a kitchen and cared enough to write things down for the people who would come after her. She looked at me across the room. I looked back at her. There was nothing either of us needed to say. She turned and put her face against Caleb's shoulder, and her shoulders moved the way shoulders move when something long carried has finally found the right place to be set down. I did not need to ask what she was feeling. I already knew. I stayed in the doorway and let them have that moment. I looked out the kitchen window into the October afternoon and thought, without any uncertainty at all, she would have loved this. 4 months passed. The way good months do not quickly, but with a fullness you only notice when you look back. I came to Maple Drive every Sunday. I learned exactly how Simone takes her coffee, which involves a specific ratio of cream, that Caleb still occasionally misremembers. Eleanor grew in the unhurried, serious way that newborns grow, as though the work of becoming a person requires her complete and undivided attention. She watched me with those eyes focused, steady noting. The same look I had recognized in the hospital window the October afternoon she arrived. I held her on Sunday afternoons and told her stories. Not the story of the Wednesday night. I told her about Beverly choosing this house because the kitchen tile felt right under her palms. About her great-grandfather and the box of patience he kept in his garage for 3 years before the right moment came to open it. About Raymond, who never lets a person wait long when they need him, and who always asks how you are sleeping before he asks about anything else. These were the stories Eleanor would need when she grew old enough to understand that the people who love you leave things in the right places on purpose, trusting you to find them at the right time. I thought about Derek on those Sunday afternoons. Not with anger. Anger had moved through me and out the other side during the long months of proceedings. Not with simple sadness either. With something more complicated and more honest than either grief for what he had been and what he had chosen not to remain, and a quiet understanding that some things cannot be repaired by the people who love them most. You can only decide how to live in the years that come after. Whether Derek would choose to become someone different was no longer a question I could answer for him. On a Sunday in February, I sat on the front porch of the house on Maple Drive with Eleanor asleep and warm in my arms. Inside, I could hear Caleb and Simone in the kitchen, the low sound of an ordinary conversation, and then Simone's laugh at something Caleb said, brief and completely unguarded. Harlow Falls in the late afternoon was quiet in the way it is when nothing is wrong. Warm, ordinary, unremarkable in the finest meaning of that word. I thought about this house, the hallway where Simone had fallen, the kitchen table where the longest night had passed, the window where I had stood holding Eleanor in the October light while the street lamps came on below. The same walls, the same floors, an entirely different story being written now, in an entirely different hand. Eleanor opened her eyes and looked at me with that unhurried, deliberate attention, the look of someone gathering information carefully and drawing her own conclusions. I looked back at her in the pale winter light and said quietly, for just the two of us, "Your grandmother would have called you a blessing, and she would have been right." Eleanor held my gaze without looking away, and I thought carefully, without forcing it, that perhaps Beverly was looking back at me through those eyes. I was not certain. I did not need to be. Some things are beautiful enough simply in the believing without requiring any proof beyond the moment itself. I am not a preacher, but I have lived long enough to believe that some things do not happen by accident. I was raised to call that grace. I still do. If this family story has taught me anything, it is this: I looked away too long. I saw the cracks and told myself they were just the grain of the wood. Do not make that mistake. Speak, when speaking still has the power to change something. Silence is not always patience. Sometimes it is just fear wearing a quieter coat. That is my honest advice. Do not be like me. Do not wait. My personal belief, for whatever it is worth a family, is not built from the good years alone. It is built from the nights someone drives 25 minutes with broken ribs to reach the one porch where the light is still on. From notebooks left on kitchen counters without explanation. From old men who learn to hold newborns and tell them the right stories before the world gets to tell them the wrong ones. This family story is proof of that quiet, imperfect, and completely true. These are the grandpa stories I never expected to carry. But I carry them because Eleanor will need them someday, and so perhaps will you. And if these grandpa stories have shown you anything about love, about loyalty, about the cost of looking away, I hope you carry something forward too. If this family story stayed with you, leave it in the comments. Share it with someone who needs it. And if grandpa stories like this one mean something to you, subscribe and stay close. The next chapter is already waiting. Thank you for staying until the very last word. A gentle note: The stories ahead contain some fictional elements constructed for meaningful human purposes. If that is not the journey you are looking for, step away kindly. But if you are staying, the kitchen light is on.